In a remarkable turnaround, Canada's Liberal Party has won the country's general election, led by political newcomer and former banker Mark Carney. Winning on a wave of anti-Trump sentiment and a surge in nationalism, Carney has vowed to stand up to the US president and win the trade war with America. But what change can the Liberals really bring to Canada? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, millions of Canadians voted in a snap election that largely focused on how candidates would respond to Trump. The Liberal Party, which was behind in the polls just 3 months ago, clinched victory. The party's leader, Mark Carney, has said Trump will never break us. But how will he stand up to the US president?
We are all Canadian, and my government will work for and with everyone.
Canada's Liberal Party has won the country's general election, beating the Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre, who lost his own seat. Mark Carney thus remains Prime Minister, a role he assumed only in March. This election was expected to be focused on almost 10 years of Liberal governance. Instead, it centred around the US president next door.
President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never ever happen.
Trump has continually threatened to make Canada part of the United States.
So I think Canada is going to be a very serious contender to be our 51st state.
And his tariff war has led to growing Canadian nationalism. It was this Canadian sentiment that gave a boost to the Liberal Party, who until Trump's return to politics were low in the polls.
When I sit down with President Trump, it will be to discuss the future economic and security relationship between two sovereign nations.
With his experience as former boss of Bank of Canada, Carney hopes to rebuild the country's economy. He advises spending billions to reduce its economic reliance on the US. Carney may also expand trade to Europe. But can Carney keep his promises, strengthen the Canadian economy, and stand up to Trump?
Well, let's meet our guests. Joining us from Toronto is Tony Chapman. He's the host of the podcast Chatter That Matters. In Guelph, in Canada, we have Geoffrey Cameron. He's assistant professor in the Department of Political Science. That's at the University of Guelph. And in Kingston, Ontario, in Canada, again, we have Ken Wong. He's Professor of Marketing at the Smith School of Business. That's at Queen's University. Guys, you're all very welcome to Roundtable. Tony, to you first. I saw Mark Carney thank the voters, the volunteers the other night, his family. Some people think the one person he should be thanking is President Trump.
Well, there's no question that Trump was the gift that kept giving. Even up to the day of the election, Trump is talking about how wonderful it would be to be the 51st state. And please elect the man that'll make it happen. So there's no doubt what the Liberals do very well, and this is a machine that should be studied in political science all over the world because they're brilliant, is they actually painted the Conservatives two ways. One, that their leader was a Trump-alike, and two, he also was incapable of negotiating with Trump. So that was a crossfire hurricane to get me caught in the middle of when this massive spotlight of Trump cast a shadow right across our election. And in doing so, Carney certainly came out in the spotlight with Trump, and they put the Conservatives into the shadows.
Jeff, to you, we know Trump is no fan of Liberals, but he's just put the Liberal Party back into power in Canada, hasn't he?
I think what Tony has said is absolutely true. I mean, if you look at the polls a few months ago, you had projections of a Conservative minority, if not majority government, and that was completely upended by the figure of Trump. I think an interesting feature of the returns that have come in have shown a real collapse of the New Democratic Party, which is not something a lot of people predicted coming into this election. Now those new Democrats are left-wing voters, and they've really split their vote between both the Liberals and the Conservatives. So I think you have two big things happening here. One is really the collapse of the left in Canada, as well as a lot of anxiety about what Trump means, and that has led a lot of voters, I think, to go to the Liberals for safety.
Ken, just give us your impression on how unified Canadians now feel as a result of all the threats you've been seeing from your nearest neighbours.
Well, I think in one sense we are very unified. And certainly if you think about Trump, we are very unified against him. At the same time, though, I think this election showed that there's a fair amount of division within Canada. The Conservatives did do quite a bit better than most people expected that they would, with the exception, of course, of the leader who lost his own seat, which I think speaks to the Trump effect. But the Conservatives ran a campaign that really focused on what I would call strategic voting, trying to convince people that, and this is why I think the NDP lost so many seats, and NDP supporters basically said it's going to be a two-horse race between the Conservatives and the NDP, and rather than use my vote to support what will be a minority party, I'll cast it either for the Liberals, as they did in British Columbia, or I'll cast it for the Conservatives, which is what happened in the province of Quebec.
Thanks, Ken. Tony, back to you. How emboldened and confident do you now think Mark Carney feels winning that election?
You know, the interesting thing about Mark Carney is he's got to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. There's no doubt, if you look at the math over the last decade, Canada's been in a free fall productivity-wise. The growth of our economy compared to other countries have really invested in the new economy. I would argue that we've got a massive divide between those that have and those that haven't. And I would suggest, I would even push back on Jeff. I don't think it's so much we've lost the left. I think that the Liberals were very successful in occupying the left and making the NDP redundant, basically just a tent pole to prop them up during this the last tenure. So what Mark Carney has to do is to say we're a party not just for those that have the means of financial means, which is where he got a lot of his votes downtown Toronto and Montreal, or those dependent on government or working for government. He's got to reach out to the young people in Canada who turn their backs on the Liberals, who traditionally are Liberal voters, and are saying, my future is not guaranteed. I've got an education, I'm armed, I can't find a job, I can't leave my parents' basement. I drive down the streets, I see tents, I see people needing food banks. And so the youth really voted to say we need change. So that's what Carney's got to do. He got elected for a lot of people saying we don't want change, but half of Canada basically said we're demanding change. So that's a tough tightrope for anybody to walk on. And that's the tightrope that Mark Carney's got to do. Keep my party in check, the people that put me in check, but also an olive branch saying we're going to take care of some of the problems that you voted to change, to ask for change for.
So, Jeff, what are those problems do you think are facing Canada? Apart from Trump, what are the internal issues, housing opportunities, economy, facing young Canadians?
Well, I think you just named them. And, you know, I agree with Tony to some extent. There is certainly an appetite for progressive politics in Canada. I mean, the Liberal Party has traditionally been the centrist party, but has taken, you know, ideas from both the left and the right to try to govern down the middle. And they're successful at doing that here. I mean, one of the challenges that Carney will face is telling a different story from the one that was told by his predecessor, Justin Trudeau, who tried to run a relatively progressive government with very little attention to economic fundamentals. And we've seen the results of that. There have been, you know, I think the Liberal government under Justin Trudeau is fairly criticized for lacking attention to issues like housing, like inflation, like temporary immigration, all of which, you know, Carney will now have to figure out how to address in a different way if his promise to deliver on economic issues is to be fulfilled.
So, Ken, you've now got a Prime Minister who is an economist, he's a banker, he's very, very good with figures and numbers, but where does he go from here in terms of dealing with an existential threat to Canada?
Well, I think he has to realize that he is up against a bully, to be honest with you, in Trump. And when you think about going up against a bully, there are two things you tend to focus on. The first is you try and convince him that you are not the opponent he wants to fight, that even if you know you're going to lose, you still put up a strong fight, and I think Carney will do so. as does, I think, most of the Canadian electorate. In fact, I think a lot of people characterize this as you were either voting out of fear of Trump or you were voting for change, as both Jeff and Tony have said. The other thing you do is you start to form alliances, and we're already seeing some movement there. Whether or not, the big question in my mind is not whether or not we continue to focus on alliances with our traditional partners in the EU, for example, but whether we also extend a hand to Southeast Asia, in particular China, which would certainly create some ire south of the border. But we also have, I think, in the case of Canada, some internal trade barriers that have to be overcome. And so you can think of that as internal allies. So, for example, in Canada, if I'm a tradesperson working in the province of Quebec, I may not be able to work in the province of Ontario. Why? Well, it just has to do with jurisdictional boundaries and some regulations. Carney has already said that that is his first priority, is to remove those barriers. And if he does, the estimates are it will improve our GDP by as much as 2%.
Thanks, Ken. Tony, that's a very good point about new friendships and new alliances. I mean, it would be some poke in the eye for Trump if Canada reaches out to China, countries in Asia, and moves ever closer to the European Union, wouldn't it?
Well, I think what we've all have to be very honest with is the reason why we are among the most successful trading partners in the world, in fact, in history, is because we share a very big border and our supply chains are interconnected. To think that we have a magic wand that suddenly can replace shipping products across a bridge versus across the ocean. And number two, really identifying what does Canada have to offer the world? And what are our capabilities in terms of our infrastructure and ports to ship it that way? And that's a lot of stuff that we've neglected over 10 years. Our ports are in disarray. We're not even digitizing them yet. So that's the first point. The second point that I also want to make is we spent so much time focused on Trump. I don't think there's a world leader that can take on Trump unless they have leverage. Trump is the master puppeteer. Nothing makes him happier, almost in a maniacal way, of having these leaders on his strings. Well, I'll tell you, the only person that's going to cut the strings is either the American people, the American Congress or Senate, or most importantly, the bond market. And what we're seeing with the bond market is keeping him in check. So I have to believe, and I'll also add the courts to it, think America is going to take care of Trump. What we need to take care of is our backyard. And to just, to say that we're just going to remove interprovincial barriers, that's talking about dismantling things like milk boards, massive lobbyists. And I think Mark Carney, I would never want this job right now. We spent 10 years watching our backyard get in complete disarray. And again, that's math. This is not, I love liberals or conservatives. This is youth unemployment. This is inflation, food inflation at a 50-year high, productivity the lowest among the G20, $1 billion a week to service our debt, a bill we're giving to the youth with zero to show for it. There's not one thing I could say to the youth is, hey, look what we've done for you with healthcare, infrastructure, a new economy for you. Nothing. So what Mark Carney's got to fix is our backyard. And I have to believe that America is going to put Trump in check because they're going to feel the pain of what he thinks he gets great joy in is that this puppeteering. But the reality is if China, Japan, Southeast Asia, and a variety of other, and Europe, just start looking and saying, well, we'll go elsewhere for our business, I think that what we're going to see is an American economy suddenly feeling very isolated as opposed to thinking they are the biggest and the strongest in the world.
Jeff, is there a feeling that Mark Carney is a very lucky politician because he spent 7 years running the Bank of England, then he goes home and just walks into the biggest job in your country? I mean, this guy he's lucked out, hasn't he?
Oh, he certainly has. I mean, if you consider it lucky, as Tony was mentioning, to step into this particular job at this moment in history. There have been noises of him stepping into Justin Trudeau's government over the last several years. In fact, it was, the rumored offering of the finance minister position to him in Trudeau's cabinet that triggered the resignation of Chrystia Freeland, the former finance minister, that then set in motion the events that led to this election. So he's been circling around the Liberal Party and its leadership for some time before, as you suggested, the cards kind of fell in a way that favored him. I just want to comment on the the kind of international trade and foreign policy issues that that Tony was just discussing, I don't think a pivot to China is likely at all. I mean, we have Mark Carney has already been making a lot of his European connections and trying to bolster ties with Europe. But at the end of the day, Canada's economic future lies to the south. I mean, we are interconnected both with the United States and with Mexico, but most of all with the United States.
Back to you, Ken. How would you like to see Prime Minister Carney dealing with Donald Trump now?
Well, I think that the key to dealing with Donald Trump is to play a waiting game, to be honest with you. I think Tony's absolutely right. The American people will take care of Trump in time. We sometimes forget that in the U.S., even though the term of the presidency may be 4 years, it's at the 2-year mark that they run their midterm elections. And if you look back in American history, there have only been 2 presidents that have maintained control of both the Senate and the Congress at the midterm point, and that was Bush, following on the Depression of 2008 and of course 9/11, and before that FDR coming on the heels of the Great Depression. So my sense is that, and this is why I think you're seeing Trump take such a wide sweeping scope of actions in a short period of time, is he realizes he has to do this quickly. He can't run for a 3rd term, at least not according to the courts and the Constitution. So he's trying to do a lot of things very quickly, and I think it's going to come back to haunt him because he just can't fight that many fronts. At the same time, though, I think Tony is also correct in the sense that we have some infrastructure work to do because Carney has already said our relationship with the states will never return to what it was. And that's a simple reality. We now know that we have a vulnerability and we have to correct that vulnerability. We have to take care of our own house internally. And whether or not we do that with allies or improving our own economic policies internally, I think certainly you always control what you can control. And that is our internal policies first, and then we'll use that as a launch board to extend our international alliances.
Thanks, Ken. Tony, back to you. I see the last 100 days, a 70% drop in Canadians visiting the US. And I would imagine as we get into summer in Europe, you're going to see a lot of Europeans wanting to visit Canada this year and for the next 4 years. I mean, those tourism figures are very interesting.
Well, it's a great point you're making, and I just put out a sort of special edition of Chatter That Matters on it. That tourism can be one of the places we create a superpower status. We've got the stage, one of the 2nd largest landmass. We've got nature on our side. We've got new and young on our side. We've also got cities with multicultural and all the notes that you want when you're visiting the big cities. The question is what we do with it, and that we have to build more Fogo Islands. It's probably something you haven't heard of, but a little finger of Newfoundland, they built this incredible inn and created an entire circular economy where everybody in that village supports the inn. Same thing happened when they went up to Cabot, one of the nicest drives, and they built 2 golf courses, Ben Calordur. Now world renowned, people want to come. So it's not just saying, hey, we're open for business because the States is closed. It's having that imagination and that fortitude to say, what can we do with Canada? Indigenous culture, new medicines, longevity, everything that the world's fascinating about, adding years to their life and life to the years. How can Canada play within that? Because what the beautiful thing about tourism, it's foreign investment, it's domestic investment. Once it's invested, that's a foundation you're building. It creates purposeful jobs. It brings energy, excitement. It keeps the young people home versus leaving to the big cities. So it's definitely one of the plays we got to play. But I'd also argue we need to become a superpower in agriculture, rare minerals in our oil, but most importantly, Canadian ingenuity.
So, Jeff, I'm feeling a lot of positivity here about Canada that Tony's been pointing out just how much Canada has going for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the vision the country needs right now. There is there's a long history of anti-Americanism within Canada that I think has been tempered over the last 20 years or so and been reawakened by the recent by the events down south. So I think we need more optimism. We need a bit more self-confidence to not define ourselves, as what the Americans are not, but by what we can offer. I think one of the big questions before this incoming government is what it does on natural resources. As Tony was kind of gesturing to, the previous Trudeau government, took a very progressive line on climate change, which often meant frustrating, oil producers in Alberta who are sitting on top of, oil reserves that they have a hard time getting to export. We've already seen Mark Carney take away a carbon tax, a consumer carbon tax. But he's made noises about opening up mining and building pipelines. That certainly would be a shift in where the Liberal Party has been on there climate change issues. But it may be necessary steps to kind of boost the economy in the way that the Liberals have been promising.
Thanks, Jeff. Ken, not that long ago, it would have sounded outlandish if Canada were to join the European Union. Give me your thoughts on that now, given that you've got a Prime Minister who is so well connected in Europe. You've got a huge population with French as their first language. Are we likely to see Canada lean more towards Europe in the coming few years?
Oh, I don't think there's any question that's going to happen, especially in the very near term. The notion of our tourism going to the U.S., Canadians love to travel, but we're not traveling to the U.S. We are down 70%, and certainly there are parts of the U.S. that are going to suffer because of that, in particular the so-called sunshine states that Canadians exodus to in the wintertime. So Canadian travel, I think, is going to pick up to Europe. And with that, of course, will become the opportunity to experience European goods and have a demand for that when they return home. So there will be demand for European products, and I believe there is a need for Canadian products in Europe. So it will be very mutually beneficial. We are already, of course, part of the NATO alignment, and that too strengthens our ties to the EU.
Tony, same question to you. I mean, can you see Canada becoming a fully fledged, even stronger friend of Europe in the next few years?
I agree with Ken that it's absolutely the right move, but then I've got to be very pragmatic. What do we have that Europe needs? Because ultimately, when it comes to trading, you want to identify an unmet need and you want to deliver against it. They came looking for our LNG and we turned our backs on them. So what we've got to really say to Europe is these are some areas where we feel there's a win-win. We're going to obviously win by exporting our product, but you're going to win by importing it. And that's ultimately what trade is all about. And I would argue once again, Canada has to be competitive. It has to stand on its ability. Right now, with a 70-cent dollar, we struggle to be competitive because our productivity has dropped so much that an American worker can produce $15,000 or $20,000 more per year than Canadian because we just haven't invested in our industry and our technology. So it's lovely to say we're going to go after these markets, but again, within our own backyard, we have to drive productivity, research and development, innovation, attract foreign capital. Right now it's fleeing. We got to bring it back, make it magnetic here. And once we build it, then we can sell it. And right now, that's the thing to just simply say, oh, we're going to shift our focus from that market that used to be 70% and find a new market. I just shake my head and say, tell me what we're going to sell other than raw commodities. And that ultimately is not a future of any country. We got to bring value to it. So that's what I'm hoping to see. Productivity, focus on 4 or 5 really big bets. And when we own those big bets, longevity would be a great one. Healthcare, AI, superpower in agriculture, content. We're incredible storytellers. Why are we not marketing our content around the world? Why are we leaving it to Hollywood? And I would argue even what you've done with the BBC in terms of producing some shows that are appetite worldwide. These are the areas that we could really play in versus trying to spread our chips across a big board, pick 4 or 5 big bets, do it better than anybody else. And then I think we're very confident that over the next 10 or 15 years, we can really start digging our way out and start seeing productivity grow, and with it our standard of living and our tax base. That is the pieces I would be playing on the chessboard.
So Jeff, just in conclusion, the Canadian people have spoken. In Carney we trust. It's Carney or bust.
That's certainly what the election results show if you look at who's forming government. But to be honest, one way to read this election result is that the Canadian public is divided. you have the two main political parties, the Liberals and the Conservatives, who are really, at the end of the day, not that far apart in the amount of the vote share they received. And we might see an election again in a couple of years where things might have changed quite a lot in terms of the circumstances in which both parties find themselves. So I think if Mark Carney was looking for a really strong mandate to go to the US president and say that the people have spoken, I don't think he has really that mandate. And so I think, what we have is actually a Canadian public that is still unsure of which direction it wants to go. And I think the next few years will be really telling about where the Prime Minister takes us.
We will keep right across it here on Roundtable. Geoff, Ken and Tony, thank you all so much for your insight. As they say in Canada, elbows up. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.